Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to Apollo Art Analysis. In this episode, we're going to take a look at a piece by the career illustrator Amir Zand. And in this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about multi-layered emphasis. We're going to talk about rarity of color. And we're also going to talk about discovery and the act of creation. So let's jump right into it. So whenever you first see this piece, you're likely going to be met with this center prism here. Of course, this actually emphasizes itself through a multitude of different things. First, we see its placement here in the center region. Of course, everything almost feels like it revolves around it. And that kind of sense of radial symmetry also draws us in as well. You'll also notice that it emphasizes itself mainly through this light on dark contrast here. It is set against that kind of cosmic night sky. That's really perfect for it to accent and draw our attention with absolute ease. We also see, like I said, multi-layered emphasis here. We also see a bit of emphasis through texture. Of course, it has kind of that cracked and a little bit solid form here. That's a lot different than, say, the glossy form and kind of the more kind of form down there. So that kind of, I guess what you would say, deviation also draws us in, really accents this form with absolute ease. And so in the context of form, we see, of course, it has definitely prismatic, so very sharp corners, no rounded forms here, maybe rounded more so in the kind of background setting, but there's no doubt that the main emphasis is placed on that prism there. And it also feels like we're standing within this kind of foreign setting. It almost feels like we're on another planet here. And the reason I say that is because, of course, you have that cosmic night sky. It feels like we're really far in there, and there's nothing like this here on our Earth, at least that we know of, unless you're going to some type of magic volcano, right? So we see, it's some type of cave, some type of intergalactic cave or planet. Definitely feels out of this world, kind of a mix of science fiction and fantasy as well whenever we're taking a look at this work. And so also we see, in the form of texture, of course, a very rigid and a very smooth form, but it's also cracked as well. So even though it does kind of have that solid form, it is also cracked within it. So unique juxtaposition going on there, a lot going on within this piece, but of course it draws your attention with absolute ease. And like I said a bit earlier, we see the placement here in the center. Of course, everything revolves around that, and we have even our lone subject right next to that as well. And speaking of our subject, we see this rarity of color within the work. Of course, a lot of the pieces kind of that darker cosmic aesthetic. We have that black, we have the gray, we have that dark blue there. Very, very dark aesthetic, but it actually uses that foundation to accent the rarity of color here. And so the most rare color here, kind of that gold, that yellow, and then the second most rare color would be that orange. So both of those definitely draw you into the center region of the spatial composition with absolute ease. So I think that's really important. Of course, it draws you in, and it really makes you notice that subject and notice the main form of the prism here in the spatial composition, of course, extremely, extremely easily. We also see, so like I said, we have kind of that rare accent defining our subject here. Our subject has this very small hovering sphere, and it's really interesting because it looks like we're kind of in the act or the candid act of discovery here. Our lone subject stands, looks at this massive prism. It feels like this subject has just discovered this in some way, maybe venturing out into the unknown, and this is kind of the reward or the goal that's finally been found. That's kind of what pops to my mind whenever I look at this piece. And with that in mind, we see, whenever I first saw this piece, I was thinking about the act of creation a lot. And we see how the form of our subject is both mirrored in the reflection of the water, but it's also mirrored in the way that the form or the shadow of the form is translated onto there as well. And so I think that's really interesting. So say in the metaphor of the act of creation itself, whenever you're creating a piece of art, you're kind of immortalizing a piece of your soul onto that piece of art or that creation. And so I kind of see that here, that may mimic a mirrored or a immortalized representation of our subject here, kind of translated onto that. But either way, very science fiction, kind of sci-fi fantasy type of work here. Feels like we're in the act of discovery and a very divine piece. You'll also see a lot of Amir Zand's work uses this grand sense of scale. So this very large spatial composition, definitely large in relation to our small subject there, that really draws us in. It also gives us that feeling of divinity or that kind of grand sense of kind of ethereality. And so all of that really creates a really priceless piece, very divine works, and it draws you in with absolute. So now I wanted to take a look at some of his other works, see what we can learn and see what we can draw together here. All right, so I got two other Amir Zand pieces. Actually, one we've already showcased. This, of course, we just showcased. And then also this piece is actually yet to be showcased, but I thought it would be a really good example to show you a bit of his style and see what we can learn from that. So like I said, that grand sense of scale is really indicative of his style here. Of course, in this piece, very small subject set with that large prism. In this piece, very small subject set with that large prism. And in this piece, very small subject, of course, set with that large prism. So in all three of these works here, that prism and also that grand sense of scale is just something that draws you in with absolute ease. We do see this kind of science fiction fantasy within his work a lot. Of course, quite literally here, kind of a cyberpunk mixed with divine fantasy. And here, a little bit more subtle. And here, it's probably hardest to draw scenes of fantasy. Definitely see a bit of science fiction in that as well, though. But you'll see, like I said, the prism and that grand sense of scale is very, very consistent across his style. He really loves that, whether, it's hard to say exactly why he's fascinated with that, but either way, it is a very, very iconic and very stylistic thing that we see from that artist profile. And so I thought that was really interesting to note, kind of compare those three and see what we could draw from that. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys learned something. In this piece, we talked about a little bit about center emphasis. We talked about the kind of textual diversity. We also talked about the path of the lone hero. Of course, finding this in that active discovery. It could also represent kind of a bit of the tumultuous travels to get the keys of knowledge. Of course, you have to go through the tough times or the oasis, the desert, or the long sea in order to find that final goal or piece of info. And so I hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys learned something. Go check out some of Amir Zand's other works. Like I said, always doing some really good stuff, and it's always a pleasure to study his work. Hope you guys enjoyed. My name is Apollo. This was Apollo Art Analysis, and I'll see you guys on the next episode.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you'd like to support our work directly, please check out our Apollo community tokens. Apollo Art Exchange is an ecosystem of art appreciation which elevates artists each and every day. Thanks for listening.